السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله، العبد المؤيد والرسول المسدد، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته المنتجبين. من كلام لسيدنا ومولانا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب يقول: الناس نيام فإذا ماتوا انتبهوا. It is a great honor, my dear brothers and sisters, to be amongst you tonight on a blessed night from the nights of the holy month of Muharram. I join you once again. I remember the last time I was blessed to come to this place was of Muharram 2005, and I had the honor to sit at the same table with my brother and colleague Samahati Sayyed Al-Modarresi. And I am very glad to be able to join you once again. And I specifically remember, Sayyidina, you were speaking about the evil of stealing towels from hotels. I do remember that. I hope no one has stolen towels since then. Maybe Bibles? No, that's an oxymoron. Steal a Bible from a hotel. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We as human beings, one of the things that happens to a lot of us, and it's quite natural, is to have dreams. Dreaming is part of human nature. I don't think there's a human being that doesn't dream. We all dream. Sometimes we remember our dreams, sometimes we forget our dreams. But there's a very important fact about dreaming, and I'm sure that all of you will notice this. When you're dreaming, you don't realize you're dreaming. You think it's real. Some people, they have happy dreams. They see themselves, they win the jackpot, they've won £1 million or $1 million. Others might see a sad dream. Someone's dying, either themselves or a family member. Others have a scary dream. They see themselves falling off a building or whatever. But what's important is that when you're dreaming, you don't realize you're dreaming. You think this is real. Not for a second it crosses your mind that this is fake. This is a dream. You think it's real. That's why if it's a scary dream, you begin to sweat, you begin to perspirate. Why? Because your body sells what the mind buys, what the mind is selling it. The mind is saying this is real, your body believes it's real, so you get scared, you begin to sweat, you begin to perspirate. You wake up, you're shaking because you think it's real. Or when you see yourself winning the jackpot, you wake up happy. Why? Because you thought it was real. Not for a moment did you think that it was fake. When is it that you realize that this is a dream? It's not reality. The second that you wake up. The moment that you wake up, you discover that what you've been watching, what you've been seeing, it's a movie. It's a dream. Sometimes it's better than the movies that came out in Hollywood. It's fake. Only when you wake up. The hadith says, "An-nasu niyam." Everyone's asleep. You and I are sleeping right now. An-nasu niyam, فَإِذَا مَاتُوا انتبهوا. When is it that they wake up? The moment that they die. Right now that we're living, we're actually sleeping. This is nothing but a dream. This is nothing. It could either be a nightmare for some people. Those that are far from Allah, this is a nightmare. Those that are close to Allah, this is a fantasy. But the important thing is this is all a dream. When is it that we wake up? When is it that we realize this is all a dream, it's all a joke, it's all a game? The second that we die. The second that we see Israel. When he comes and knocks the door, that's when we realize that game's over. We're leaving. We're departing. We have to go. Have you been to a place where you enjoy it so much that the minute that you have to leave, it's such a sad time for you? That's how it is. The time that we have to leave, we realize that all of this was a dream. All of this was a game. الناس نيام فإذا ماتوا انتبهوا. The Quran says, فكشفنا عنك غطاءك فبصرك اليوم حديد. When you die, your vision becomes 20/20. You get to see things that you didn't realize before, you didn't see before. In this life, there's so many things that we don't realize, so many things that we don't comprehend. The hadith says, Salat al-Layl is light in our graves. Do we understand what that means? When we go over there, we realize what it means. We realize the importance of Salat al-Layl, the significance of Salat al-Layl. Or Salat al-Jama'ah. So many of us, we neglect to pray Salat al-Jama'ah. We don't realize what it means. When we go over there, we see the value of Salat al-Jama'ah. We see how much reward it has. How much Salat al-Layl, how much reward it has. The hadith says, he who cries, or makes others cry, or pretends to cry, subhanallah, or pretends to cry for the cause of Imam Hussain deserves forgiveness. Or in another hadith, shall enter paradise. Do you realize the significance of these tears? Here we don't. That's why some people, they ridicule us. Look at them crying for a man who died 14 centuries ago, beating their chest for a person who died 14 centuries ago. They think it's a joke. They don't realize it here. They only realize it there in that life. In that life. So many righteous people have seen dreams and have been told in their dreams that in that life there is one man that counts. He's the commander. He's the commander in chief. And that man is Sayyid al-Shuhada al-Imam Hussain salamullah alayh. How well is your connection with him? Because when you go there, you're going to need him. When you go there, you're going to want some sort of relationship with him. So let's think, brothers and sisters. Let's think about that next life. Let's start preparing ourselves for that next life. Enough about this life. Enough investments in this life. We spend all of our hours, all of our minutes, all of our days, our entire life working for this life. It's all about enjoyment in this life. We neglect that life. We neglect the real life, the eternity. Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salam, was coming back from the Battle of Siffin, where he fought with Muawiyah. He was coming back to his capital, which is Kufa, the city of Kufa. The narration says that he stood behind the city of Kufa. What's behind the city of Kufa? Today, which city is behind the city of Kufa? Najaf. وقف في ظهر الكوفة أو على ظهر الكوفة وجعل يخاطب القبور. There was a cemetery. Until today, there's a cemetery in Najaf. In fact, it's the largest cemetery in the world. Hundreds of millions of people are buried in that cemetery. He stands, his companions are around him, and he says the following: Ya Ahl al-Ghurba, Ya Ahl al-Turba, Ya Ahl al-Wahsha, Ya Ahl al-Wahda. Oh, the people of loneliness, oh, the people of darkness, oh, the people of soil and sand, oh, the people of solitude. أنتم لنا فرط سابق ونحن لكم تبع لاحق. You have beaten us to your destinies, and we shall soon be following. And then the Imam gives them a news flash. He tells them, you want to know what's happening here? What you're missing out in this life? You want the news flash? You want the 411? I'll give you the 411. أما الدور فقد سكنت. You want to know about your homes? Your homes are no longer vacant. People are living in your homes. A reliable source, I heard this story from a reliable source. It says that a man, a gentleman, an elderly man, passed away. His children, as soon as they saw him passing away, they took him to a nearby hospital to put him in a fridge, in a refrigerator, until they bury him. They came back home. After 2 hours, the eldest son receives a phone call from the hospital telling him to rush back to the hospital. He said, what's happening? They said, we have some wonderful news for you. Your father is alive. He didn't die. He said, my father didn't die? He said, yes, your father just came back. He came back to life. He said, who told him to come back to life? What is he doing coming back to life? He said, are you sure you're his son or you're the neighbor? I'm telling you, your father is back to life. Come and collect him. And he's a little bit cold because he was in a fridge. Bring a jacket with you. I'm just kidding. He didn't say that. He said, I can't. Your father's alive. He said, I can't come see him anymore. Why? Because just an hour ago, we divided everything. The house, the business, the cars, even his bedroom. Even his bedroom's gone. He's going to come back for what? To see that everything's gone? Let him stay. Keep him with you for a while. This is reality. وَأَمَّا الدُّورِ فَقَدْ سُكِنَتْ. As for the homes, they're no longer vacant. وَأَمَّا الْأَزْوَاجِ فَقَدْ نُكِحَتْ. You want to know about your spouses? They already got married. Don't think that your poor widow is waiting for you. You're not going to come back anymore. The husband got married. Your wife got married. They all get married. You think they're going to be waiting? Only a fool thinks that his spouse is going to stay for the rest of her life or for the rest of his life unmarried. I have a friend from Los Angeles. I saw him once. His wife had passed away. We went to the funeral. We went to the burial. Every time I saw him, he was crying. Each time I saw him, he was crying. He would tell me, Sayyid, please pray for me. Please pray that Allah gives me patience. And then one day I saw him, he was smiling. I told him what happened. Maulana, I got married. Well, congratulations. No one stays unmarried. No matter how much you cry at the end of the day, you're going to forget your deceased one. You're going to forget the person who died, and you're going to go and get married. وَأَمَّا الْأَزْوَاجِ فَقَدْ نُكِحَتْ وَأَمَّا الْأَمْوَالِ فَقَدْ قُسِّمَتْ هَذَا خَبَرُ مَا عِنْدَنَا. You wanted the news flash? This is a news flash. You wanted to know what's happening? This is what's happening. هَذَا خَبَرُ مَا عِنْدَنَا فَمَا خَبَرُ مَا عِنْدَكُمْ. Now Amir al-Mu'mineen wants the news flash from them. Tell us what happened to you. Tell us about your journey. This long journey. Their journey of death, after death, going in our graves. What happens in our graves? When Munkar and Nakir, they come, the first night in our grave. Tell us about that journey. And then he looks at his companions. He says, obviously they cannot speak. أَمَّا لَوْ أُذِنَ لَهُمْ بِالْكَلَامِ. However, they cannot speak. But if they could speak, أَمَّا لَوْ أُذِنَ لَهُمْ بِالْكَلَامِ لَأَخْبَرُوكُمْ. If they could speak, they would tell you one statement. Just one statement. One sentence. This whole journey, they'll summarize it in one statement. لَأَخْبَرُوكُمْ أَنَّ خَيْرَ الزَّادِ التَّقْوَى. That the best thing to bring with you is taqwa. Bring piety. Bring piety. Nothing else matters. Not your homes, not your cars, not your children. Nothing. Nothing else matters. Just bring piety with you. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to prepare us for that life. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to prepare us for that journey. Your tears for Imam Hussein, brothers and sisters, it prepares you. It helps you. This tear that comes down from your eyes, don't take it lightly. Each tear for that Imam, for that sacrifice, it counts. It counts as mountains on your balance. There's a saying in Arabic that says, إِذَا حَضَرَ الْمَاء بَطَلَ التَّيَمُّمْ. When there's water, you have to perform wudu. You cannot perform tayammum. Samahad Al-Sayyid is here. I've taken more than enough of his time. You'd much rather be listening to his words of wisdom. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين. First of all, I say to you, brothers and sisters, elders, as well as, of course, my very dear brother, my colleague, my second cousin, Samahad Sayyed Hossein Al-Qazwini, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So if you're wondering, yes, that is where he gets the good looks from. It's from my side of the family. And not only that, but on a more serious note, the Sayyid, as you probably know, is a resident of the holy city of Karbala. He resides in that city, and to reside in such a holy place obviously has its spiritual advantages. But perhaps more relevant to us, there is a tradition that states that if one looks into the face of a person who has just returned from the pilgrimage to the holy city of Karbala for a period of 6 months after their return, when one looks into their face, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive them, in other words, the observer, all of their sins. Now, this is a tradition that's not talking about the greatness of Imam Hussain, or the greatness of his companions, or even the greatness of one who visits Imam Hussein's shrine, but the greatness of one who looks into the face of such a learned, wonderful person such as Samahat al-Sayyid. So I would have preferred if the Sayyid had continued with his wonderful lecture so that we would benefit both from his knowledge as well as looking at his luminous face. May Allah bless him, inshallah. He really is a wonderful person. And I myself have a lot to learn from him. Moral complacency. John Stuart Mill is one of the foremost social scientists, philosophers, and perhaps the most renowned liberal thinker in the world. He lived in the 19th century, and the most important work that was produced by this person is his book titled On Liberty. A lot of you are familiar with that book because it formed the basis and the foundation for many of the constitutions of the Western world. A lot of the constitutions are actually based on the ideas postulated and expounded by John Stuart Mill, especially in this book of his. And perhaps one of the most famous ideas that he proposes in that book, one of the most famous concepts, is the concept of no harm. Basically, the concept states that you can do whatever you wish, you can engage in any activity that your heart desires, you can say or do what you want so long that you do not harm other people. In other words, your freedom ends where mine begins, but more in the affirmative sense of the term. So you can do what you want, as long as you know that you're not hurting anyone, as long as you know that nobody is suffering as a result, either directly or indirectly, of your actions, then it's okay. Of course, there are many flaws that we find in this concept. The first is that this allows people to engage in any immoral, in any illicit activity. And it basically gives them an open ticket to do whatever they want. Once again, as long as they don't harm anyone, as long as if there are activities taking place between two or more people, those activities are consensual, that both parties involved consent to what's taking place, then it becomes okay. First of all, this paves the way for moral relativism. And the idea of moral relativism is that there is no absolute moral standard, that morality is subject to interpretation, that morality is subject to people casting their votes in the ballot box, that people can make their morality as they go along. They can choose what's right and what's wrong, that there is no absolute moral standard. Okay, would you like to announce this?
Sorry to stop you, but there's 2 cars in the rugby car park which need to be moved immediately because they want to close it. Thank you.
Whose cars are they? And when there is no absolute moral standard, then once again, morality is subject to interpretation. Morality is subject to whatever people wish it to be. And what that means is that today's sin is tomorrow's deed. That yesterday's crime is something that deserves an award in this day and age. And there are so many examples of that. For example, Adolf Hitler disliked 3 groups of people. Jews, the disabled, and homosexuals. He saw disabled as a burden on society. And he had the idea that since these people represent nothing but a burden to society, they're not functioning members of society, therefore they need to be eliminated. Now, in this day and age, and it's interesting to see the parallels of how this idea exists to this very day in the area of abortion. Abortion takes place in many cases where the parents are told that the child which is to be conceived, which is going to be born, this child has some sort of a disability. And many people feel that that is grounds for them to forcefully terminate the pregnancy and to kill the child. And if you take this idea, you'll notice that it's exactly the same, except Hitler went a step ahead, a step further, and he said, well, since we missed this disabled child while he was in the womb of his mother and we didn't have a chance to kill him there, let's kill him now that he's 20 or 30 years old. But it's exactly the same, right? So that's one of the problems. Another example is homosexuals. And homosexuality was absolutely abhorred. It was loathed at that time, not only in Germany, but all over the world. Even in the United States, homosexuality was seen as an immoral act. Forget sinful. Forget looking at it from a religious perspective. Morality is different. Morality is different from religious laws. Religious laws, and we'll talk more about this perhaps later on, but religious laws are the laws that only a specific group of people adhere to because they subscribe to that religion. Whereas morality, what we're proposing is that morality is an absolute standard. It is something that everyone agrees on. Everyone agrees that stealing is wrong. Everyone agrees that, for example, hurting a little orphan child is wrong. There's no way you can condition that. You know, as hard as you try, you could pour all the conditioner from that bottle, you could squeeze it all you want, but you'll never be able to justify hurting a little orphan child. And that's a part of the absolute moral standard. As a matter of fact, we have a tradition that states, Al-aqlu shar'un dakhil wa shar'u aqlun kharij. The intellect, which represents the practical face of morality, it represents the faculty with which all of human beings are endowed, which allows us to make a distinction between right and wrong, between good and evil. this intellect is the inner version of religion. Religion is revelation. Religion is verses in a divine scripture, right? So it's an external element that comes in order to reinforce the intellect that you have within you, to reinforce the sense of morality that we have. So the tradition states that the intellect is religion within, and religion is the intellect without. In other words, they both reinforce one another. They both support one another, and they both complement one another, and they're both exactly the same as one another, except in two different forms. So homosexuality was abhorred, and yet what you have today is, most people living in the Western Hemisphere agreeing that homosexuality is no longer seen as an immoral act. It is okay to engage in homosexual activities nowadays. And they're going a step further in trying to legalize this marriage. And it's interesting, I remember a few years back there was a very heated debate in the US about allowing homosexual partners to obtain legal status in terms of their marriage, quote unquote. And I remember one of the brothers, I was talking to, and he's a Muslim. He was telling me, well, isn't there a different way of looking at this? Maybe we should allow them to do that because we shouldn't deprive them of their human rights. I said, what are you talking about? What sort of a human right are we talking about here? To get married to a same-sex partner and make that another form of the sacred establishment known as marriage, that desecrates the very idea of marriage. It absolutely destroys the family structure. So let's not talk about human rights here, because what you see happening is morality becoming relative rather than absolute. Morality being based on what the majority think, what the majority vote for in a democratic system. Whereas that can't be right. Morality has to be absolute. It has to have a static nature. It can't change. Otherwise, what was seen as sinful 50 years ago is today very much acceptable. And consequently also, what is seen as sinful today will be acceptable in 50 years' time. Because according to the no harm concept, John Stuart Mill's idea, if consensual relationships are okay so long that they don't hurt anyone and that they're consensual, like we said, what about incest? In fact, I remember a few years ago, there was a father who had engaged in intercourse with his daughter. And his daughter was actually an adult, technically speaking. She was 18 years or perhaps older, I don't remember. He was taken to court, and I think they even had some kids. It was ugly. And he was taken to court, and he was interviewed on TV, and he said something that makes a lot of sense if you take the ideas of John Stuart Mill and other liberal philosophers and you apply them literally. He said, we both agreed to enter in this relationship. What's wrong with it? And suddenly, people start wondering, well, that's true. If giving consent makes an immoral act moral, therefore this should be okay. Euthanasia is another example. In most countries around the world, with the exception of 2 or 3, if I'm not mistaken, euthanasia is a crime. Even though the agreement between the two parties is consensual, isn't it? A patient who is a terminal patient, who's going through a lot of pain, and there's no hope of recovery whatsoever. Say they're 90 years old and he's got, brain cancer. There's no way he can recover, and the pain is absolutely excruciating. We all agree. As a matter of fact, they say that the worst type of pain is cancer pain, because it works within the at the cellular level, and it's very, very bad. It's excruciating, right? So this patient signs an agreement and hands over his rights to his doctor, to his very trusted GP, and asks the GP to allow him to die in a merciful fashion. Is that okay since it's consensual? It's not okay. So now people are starting to see some major flaws in the idea of no harm, which is why Islam goes a step further. Islam says, yes, you can't hurt other people. You cannot bring harm to other members of society. Yes, you can't do that. And the reason you can't do that is because these people are individual, independent entities, and at the end of the day, the decision as to how they should conduct their lives goes back not to you because you don't own them, right? It goes back to them. Islam says the decision as to how you should conduct your life doesn't go back to you, but it goes back to your Creator. Your body was loaned to you. Your time, your resources, your energy, everything you have was loaned to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, in return, you can experience all types of legitimate pleasure. You can have your fun. You can consume food and drinks and enjoy your life. There's no doubt about that within its legitimate channels. But in return, there are responsibilities. And one of those responsibilities is that you cannot bring harm to yourself, which is by the way, why, incidentally, suicide is also a crime. Even though there are no two partners, there's no consent required, it's you doing what you wish, right? Without hurting other people. But can you commit this crime? Can you jump off the cliff or jump off the top of the building and kill yourself? No, you can't do that. It's not up to you, according to modern laws and constitutions. So, when it comes to morality, we have to refer back to an absolute moral standard. This moral standard is built into the human psyche. It exists within each and every one of us. We all have a basic understanding of what's right and what's wrong. Yes, sometimes what can happen is, due to sin, due to prolonged periods of ignorance, what can happen is that morality can be erased. This built-in moral conscience that we have within us gets erased, which is why one of the main roles played by prophets and messengers and apostles is for them to unearth this great treasure, this immensely powerful and important tool that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed us with. لِيُثِيرُ لَهُمْ دَفَائِنَ الْعُقُولِ, the tradition states. This is the role of the prophets, to unearth the buried treasures of the intellect. وَلِيُذَكِّرُوهُمْ مَنْسِيَّ نِعْمَتِهِ, and to remind them, the prophets came to remind us of the great blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the biggest and the worst consequences and the worst side effects of moral complacency within our small social circles, within a group of friends, within a community, and the fact that people overlook, or let's just say tolerate, certain sins, one of the biggest side effects, and by far the most dangerous, is what most of us are unaware of, and that is the fact that sinful deeds or a sinful nature is very much something that people can pick up from one another. It's like a disease. It spreads really easily. It's airborne even. Which is why we have traditions instructing us against ever speaking about sins. And I've seen, unfortunately, a lot of people are unaware of this. What happens is, in order to refrain from sinful acts, a friend might have the best of intentions, and he would tell his friend that, next time I engage in the same sinful act, I'm going to come to you and tell you about it. That's why they have support groups. That's why they have their AA meetings. And one of the ideas when you go into those AA meetings is for you to sit down and talk about your problems, talk about your challenges, and just steam them all off, and talk about some of the things that you've been going through in the process of stopping this bad habit, for instance. And that's wrong. Traditions tell us never speak of any sin that you commit, ever. Because what this does is that it gets the word around. And people are are going to start thinking that, well, it seems that everybody's doing this. If he's doing it, then maybe it's okay for me to do it. He's a person who goes to mosque every day. He's a person who recites, marthiya every once in a while. He's a person who's religious, generally speaking. So if it's okay for him to do it, then subconsciously, other people are going to start thinking that maybe it's okay for me to do it as well. They won't actually say it, but subconsciously, that will act as an extra element to justify that same sinful act when it's committed by them. So it's absolutely dangerous, which is why traditions tell us that we should never speak about sinful acts. We should never help them surface. We should never mingle with people who commit acts of sin openly. That by itself is a dangerous thing. It's a dangerous state of mind. If you knew that someone had a communicable disease, would you sit next to them? Would you socialize with them? Or is it not the case that when a father has a son and the son has a communicable disease, even as a father of this child, when he goes to hospital to visit his son, he's got this thick glass separating him and his son because the disease can be communicated. So even as a father, he takes precautions and he stays away from his son. Why is it that when, as friends and as family members, a lot of people might say, well, my cousin is kind of sinful. He's not that religious. He's not on the straight path. He goes to clubs. He does this. He does that. But at the end of the day, he's my cousin. I can't really sever relations with a family member. Yes, you can. That's one of the messages that Ahlul Bayt tell us. You can sever and you must sever relations with him. If you feel that you're not being a positive influence, if you feel that you're not doing, you're not able to sort of get him to realize the errors of his ways and to bring him back on the straight path. If you're not doing that, if you can't do that, and you give up, then you must sever all relations with him. In fact, on one occasion, I remember seeing a hadith where a person came to Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. The Imam told him that, why do you visit so-and-so? He mentioned somebody's name. And he told the Imam, that's my uncle, Ya ibn Rasulullah. The Imam said to him, but he has devious beliefs. And notice that how in this tradition, the Imam isn't referring to any actual sinful acts or a sinful lifestyle or an illicit sort of mindset. The Imam is talking about his beliefs, which is a step further even. He has devious beliefs. He said to the Imam, but I never even talked to him about those topics. I just visit him socially because he's my uncle. The Imam said to him, you know what? You either visit us or you visit him. You want to go and hang out with your uncle, with your deviant uncle? Fine. Be my guest. Knock yourself out. But if you want to be with us, then you don't hang around your uncle. And the other problem, the other side effect, and I'll conclude, the other side effect of having this illicit lifestyle, which is dominant in this day and age, and it's very, very difficult to refrain from that. It's very difficult to stay away from it, which is why Imam Al-Rida says in one narration, يَأْتِي عَلَى النَّاسِ زَمَانٌ, there will come a day, الْعَافِيَةُ فِيهِ عَشَرَةُ أَقْسَامٍ, safety, and to be on the safe side, will be divided into 10 portions. تِسْعَةٌ مِّنْهَا فِي اعْتِزَالِ النَّاسِ, 9 of those 10 elements that help you stay on the safe side are about you isolating yourself from the rest of society. I know I'm making a bold statement here. And I'm not saying that you should avoid all forms of social contact with the outside world, that you should become a goth and live in a cave. I'm not saying that. But you have to assess your own situations. You have to analyze the given circumstances and decide for yourself. If you find yourself in a situation where either you mingle with people and are affected by their sense of morality, their twisted sense of morality, or you stay at home and be safe with you and your family, then it's I think the choice is very clear here. The Imam says 9 portions of safety are in you isolating yourself from the rest of society, and the 10th portion is for you to be silent. To be silent, not to talk. Don't speak. Don't talk too much. Don't engage. That's the idea. And of course, the other problem is that according to one of our traditions, إِنَّ السَّيِّئَاتِ آخِذٌ كُلٌّ مِنْهَا آخِذٌ بِعُنُقِ الْآخَرِ. One sin leads to the other, and I don't want to talk about this, but one sin leads to another. It's like a chain, right, with rings. Each one of those rings represents a sin. You pull one, inevitably you're also pulling the next, and the third, and the fourth. And it just keeps getting worse and worse. And the more you pull, the more you sink. And the more you sink, the more difficult it becomes to pull yourself out. It's like quicksand. The more you're there, you're trying to engage, the more you sink in. Though, of course, that doesn't mean that if you're at the very last stage of committing a sinful act, you can't stop and you can't say no. Yes, you can. And as we talked about last night, for those of you who were there, Al-Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi is a prime example of that, on how you can never make up the excuse of going too far into sin and not being able to come back out, or that it was your circumstances that led you into the sin or whatever. You can't do that. But once again, one of the problems, like you said, is the fact that each sin leads to another. It's like a guy who went to propose, and what he did was he obviously went to his potentially his in-laws' house. He met the girl's father, and he was sitting down chewing gum. So the girl's father sort of felt a bit offended and insulted. He said to him, "I see you're chewing gum." He said, "Yeah, it's a nicotine gum. I'm chewing it because I'm trying to quit smoking." He said, "Oh, so you smoke too?" He said, "Yeah, well, I mean, after the whole drug problem, I tried to quit that, so now I'm on smoking." He said, "You did drugs?" He said, "Well, I mean, when you're in prison, it happens, He said, "You were in jail?" He said, "Well, I killed the guy," and he said, "You killed a guy?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "What did he do?" He said, "Well, I proposed to his daughter. He wouldn't give her." And the problem is, one thing leads to the other, and before you know it, you're chewing nicotine gum. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us all and to empower us and to give us the ability to refrain from all acts of sin and to try and remain steadfast on the straight path, on the path of Ahlul Bayt, inshallah, to please our 12th Imam. Let's not pour salt on his wounds. Let's not add insult to the injury. The Imam himself is going through so much. The fact that he can see his followers, his lovers being massacred, his followers being killed, his loyal Shia being displaced in places like Iraq, places like Afghanistan, elsewhere. The hardships that the Shia of Ahlul Bayt have to go through is enough for the Imam to bear. Let's not add insult to that injury. Let's not be sinful followers. Let's try and lead a lifestyle that is in accordance to his teachings, inshallah. هذا والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.
Muhammad. Thank you for that enlightening lecture. We will now, inshallah, move on to the question and answer session so that everyone can gain maximum benefit from this session. Please keep your questions brief and relevant to the topics just discussed. Please also clarify which speaker you're addressing the question to. We will, inshallah, have alternating questions between the ladies and the gents. Is there a question from the ladies' side?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is a question for Sayyid Modarresi. You suggested to cut off ties with those with deviant beliefs, those who sin. Yet Islam has placed great emphasis and importance on Sila Rahim.
Yes.
What do you think about this?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Once again, as I explained, there needs to be a balance. Yes, Salatul Arham is important. Salatul Arham is a means of the longevity of life. It extends our lives, as mentioned in our traditions and hadith. It's a wonderful way to strengthen social bonds. It is a way to bring comfort to our loved ones and our family members. It is a means of providing financial support for the needy members of our families, because some scholars say that Salatul Arham is first and foremost prescribed so that people would support those in their family who are in need. And that is the best form of Salatul Arham. Yes, it's good to say Salamu Alaikum every once in a while. It's good to give them a call on the Eid and all that. But what's even more important is that if you have the means to do so, you should provide financial support for them. All those things are important. But remember, we're talking about the unfortunate scenario of having a family member who is not on the straight path, a family member who is leading a sinful lifestyle. And like I said, the biggest danger is us being affected by that lifestyle, is us not only being unable to pull them back on the straight path, but being dragged along with them. And I think the example of the communicable disease pretty much explains it all. If there is, if they do have deviant ideas and beliefs or a sinful lifestyle, then either I try to cure them. If I can't, I stay right away from them. And we have very, like I said, very clear traditions that instructs us to do that.
Is there a question from the gents? I think there's a floating mic over there if anyone wants to ask a question.
Assalamu alaikum. My question was how do you first refrain from certain sins, any protection to not commit sins? And you say one sin goes to another sin and a third and fourth. How does it apply? In a more another kind of example, if you can, please. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, first of all, one of the things that we need to do is avoid areas of perplexity. What needs to happen is we take a good look at our lives and the bad habits that we may have. Once the habits are identified, the first stage in eliminating that bad habit, let's call it bad habits now. The first stage in eliminating the habit is to acknowledge the existence of the habit, right? Because it would be very unfortunate if the person was in denial. If they were engaged in a sinful act, and this is quite a common occurrence, if they were engaged in a sinful act and they were ignorant about the fact that this was a sinful act, or ignorant about the grave consequences of engaging in a sinful act, then they're in denial. And if they're in denial, what needs to happen is that, that's where people have interventions. That's where people are, encouraged to see a professional, encouraged to see a scholar or someone who has the expertise to make them well aware of the fact that they're engaged in a sinful act. So that's the first thing, to acknowledge the fact that it's a bad habit, that it's an act of sin, and that it needs to come to an end immediately. That's the first thing. The second thing is, once the bad habit is acknowledged and recognized, then it's quite easy to find out how this bad habit came about, how it was formulated. And once that happens, it's quite easy also to find out under which circumstances do I feel inclined or do I feel the urge to engage in this sinful act. For example, if someone commits the sin of backbiting all the time? Well, in that case, they know that for them to remain isolated and not to be with a certain group of friends, for example, who have a certain way that encourages this sin, they know what the way out happens to be. All you got to do is stay away from that group of friends, stay away from that specific circle of friends. Or if it's the kind of sinful act that takes place while a person is in isolation, what they need to do is to occupy themselves with other activities and whatnot. But generally speaking, I think the most important thing when it comes to avoiding acts of sin is to seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because when you begin the process of rehabilitation, when you begin the process of clearing the sinful acts from your life, and you need that extra support. You need the knowledge of knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is on your side. And as I might have mentioned before, there's a tradition that states, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ يُحِبُّ أَن يُطَاعَ. The shaitan loves to be obeyed. He has this tendency within him that gives them a great deal of pleasure when someone obeys him. And he's dissatisfied when a person refuses to obey the shaitan. So the Imam says, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ يُحِبُّ أَن يُطَاعَ فَإِذَا عُصِيَ وَلَّى. Because he's dissatisfied when someone disobeys him, and he's disobeyed once or twice or 3 times and so on and so forth, he's eventually going to give up, and he'll be upset with the fact that he doesn't really have a very loyal follower in this case, and so he will leave you alone. So the initial stage might be difficult to acknowledge, to seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to avoid being in a state of denial, to ask Allah to help and support you, and then to persist for a few times. After that, it becomes a habitual thing, and inshallah, you'll be able to overcome it.
Is there a question from ladies?
Assalamu alaikum. This is another question for Sayyid Modarresi. What arguments can you use for people who say that some are born homosexual and it's not a choice?
No, I much prefer your answer.
Not really an expert on homosexuality. So enough with those questions. It was just an example. Okay, first of all, let's assume, for argument's sake, that gay people have a genetic predisposition towards homosexual acts. In other words, they are naturally inclined for, to opt for a person of the same gender. Let's assume that that's true. There are 2 main arguments. The first is that pedophiles are also scientifically proven to be genetically predispositioned towards little children. Does that get them off the hook? No. So what's the difference between the 2 scenarios here? How come pedophilia is a crime of the worst type? It's one of the worst crimes, right? Thankfully, relative morality hasn't really caught up with pedophilia, because maybe in 50 years' time, God knows, maybe they'll make it legal. I don't know. But so far, alhamdulillah, we're okay. We're all sort of on the safe side here. But pedophiles are proven to be genetically predispositioned. They're proven scientifically to have tendencies towards little children. So why is it that the fact that their brains are structured in such a way that makes them inclined towards children, that doesn't get them off the hook? And yet suddenly homosexuals want to get off the hook and want to be excused for their immoral acts because they're genetically predispositioned? That's the first argument. The second argument is that let's assume that that's true. That merely means that it's more difficult for them to refrain from homosexual tendencies than it is for heterosexuals. It's just like saying, okay, I'm hungry right now, and I'm naturally inclined to eating this food which is haram. Therefore, it's okay for me to eat it. Does that argument make sense? It doesn't make sense. Yes, you're hungry. Yes, you're naturally inclined. Yes, you have urges and temptations and desires and all those things. But that doesn't mean you should go ahead and eat something that's haram. Unless, of course, you found yourself in extreme circumstances where you would die, right? But extreme circumstances by definition means that they're rare. They don't happen very often. So just because I'm hungry, and if someone was sitting next to me and he's not that hungry, when he looks at that food, it's haram. But because he's not hungry, he's not inclined towards the food, he's not tempted to eat it. Does that mean that, for example, God forbid, Allah is being unjust with me because I have those urges and I have that temptation and my friend doesn't? No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests each and every one of us in a specific, custom-made, tailor-made way. He knows our personalities. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shaped them so He knows exactly how they are. He knows about our urges, about our temptations, about our desires. Therefore, He tests you in a specific way, and He tests me in a different way. And He tests someone else in a completely different way again. So homosexuals are being tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's assume they have those temptations and urges, but that doesn't mean they cannot help it. Which is why, and just to back this up, which is why most homosexuals are actually bisexuals. What happened all of a sudden? You're okay with women and men? I thought it was just about men. I thought it was just the same gender. But suddenly they find themselves having their urge. God forbid, I mean, na'udhu billah, it really is disgusting when you think about it. It's absolutely disgusting. I hope that helps.
Is there a question from the gents?
Assalamu alaikum. It is said that psychologists have said that morality develops like your cognitive thoughts, so it's open to manipulation. So what can be where does justice come for those minds that can be manipulated by people into changing their moral beliefs?
Sayyidina, they want to hear you speak.
Sayyidina, they're sick and tired of hearing from me.
Tell them.
Okay, what was the question again? I assumed the Sayyid would take it, so I switched off. What was it?
Some psychologists have said that your morality change can be developed, like your thought patterns.
Right.
So it's open to manipulation. So what can be said about those people whose moral beliefs have been manipulated by those other people? Where does the justice come for them?
Like I said, the idea of relative morality is dangerous because they say that it can be developed. That's why today's sinful act is sinful, but then they tell you that in 50 years' time, incest or pedophilia or murder or all these crimes, suddenly the human mind has developed enough to realize that they're no longer sinful. What we're saying is, no, you haven't developed. You've mutated. You haven't progressed. You've regressed. You have subjected morality to external elements. And one of those external elements is the democratic process, like we mentioned. Therefore, if the majority of people decided that something was right, suddenly it becomes right. I mean, from a logical perspective, this argument is flawed. It doesn't make sense. Just because most people said that it's okay, therefore it's okay. Let's take alcohol, for example. If you see the arguments against alcohol, they're absolutely overwhelming, right? As a matter of fact, if you ask any doctor which is more harmful, cigarettes or alcohol, they'll tell you it's alcohol. Then how come there is so much negative campaigning taking place against alcohol, and yet nothing taking place with regards to, against cigarette smoking, whereas there's nothing when it comes to alcohol consumption? How come? Because the majority wish to continue to drink freely. That's it. People just want to drink, especially the politicians. The politicians are never going to enact a law that bans the consumption of alcoholic beverages because they themselves thrive on alcohol, right? Whereas if you look at it from a logical perspective, here's something interesting. If people based their morality, even proponents of moral relativism, if they based their morality on logical arguments, I think we wouldn't have as many problems as we do today. even logic is absent from the whole equation. Logic is really not something that plays a very big part here. It's the popular taste. It's pop culture. That's what it is. That's what dictates what's right and what's wrong. And that's what makes it so dangerous. If you were to use the intellect and sit down and draw up 2 columns, a list of pros and cons for alcohol, what would you find? You would find that sure, alcohol has benefits. It thins the blood. It helps the circulatory system. You know, sometimes alcohol is prescribed for certain medical conditions. Sure. And doctors don't need to tell us that alcohol has benefits, because Allah told us that 14 centuries ago. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسَرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. They ask you, O Prophet, in the Quran, they ask you about alcohol and games of chance, articles of gambling. Tell them they are sinful and there are benefits in them for the people, but their sinful nature outweighs their benefits. Allah says that in the Quran, right? So, if you were to draw up a list of pros and cons, alcohol helps the circulatory system, fine, blah, blah, blah. And then, what about the cons? What about the cons? Let me give you just one brief example. I saw a chart that it clearly illustrates the level of alcohol consumption, specifically vodka, in Russia. And if you see this chart, obviously it has to do with the occasion, it has to do with whether or not it's Christmas time, and the weekend and whatnot. So the chart illustrates how much vodka Russians consume on an annual basis, and it goes up and down and up and down, and peaks during Christmas time, right? The time when people are supposed to celebrate the birth of one of the greatest moral pioneers humanity has ever seen, Jesus Christ, the Son of Mary, right? But let's leave that aside. That chart, I saw another chart that illustrates and draws the number of homicides and violent crimes that take place in Russia. If you were to put the 2 charts on top of one another, they would match each other exactly. Now, isn't that a logical argument to tell you that whenever alcohol consumption goes up, violent crime also goes up? Homicides also go up in Russia. Therefore, alcohol consumption is a contributing, at the very least, if not being the cause of these homicides and violent crimes, at the very least, it's a contributing element. But they don't do that. So once again, relative morality makes no sense because it's based on people's tastes, it's based on pop culture, it's based on politicians and what they wish to do, it's based on the popular vote. And you can never tell what's right and what's wrong based on what other people say. You have to be the judge of your own morality using your intellect and using an absolute moral standard, which we said can be nothing but religion, and the best of all religions, the religion of Islam.
We have time for one more quick question from the ladies.
Assalamu alaikum. A question for Sayyid Qazwini, please. Can you offer us any advice on how to stop living in the dream you mentioned and face reality?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I was really enjoying Sayyid Modarresi's session. Are you sure you don't want him to answer this question? How can we start living in this dream? Was that the question? You see, brothers and sisters, reality is that this dream will end soon. Sooner or later, the dream will end. The dream meaning this life. To realize that it's short, that it's fake, that it will end soon, that's the most important part. Some people, they live life as if they're immortal, as if they're here to stay and they will never be asked to leave. That's the most dangerous part to be. That's the most dangerous position to be in, to think that you're here for good and you're never going to leave. And sort of to tie in with what Samahta Sayyid was saying, regarding sins. The one who performs so many sins, this is his mentality. His mentality is he's never leaving. He's staying here. Otherwise, if he knew that he's leaving, he will be asked, there's a judgment, there's a court, there's a judge, he'll be careful. With every step, with every word, with every sort of action, he would be careful. The key is realize that you're only transiting. Sometimes when we're traveling, when we're going from the US to the Middle East or the opposite, we either transit in London or in Frankfurt or any other European country. We realize that we're only here for an hour, 2 hours, 7 hours max. What am I going to do? Buy a house in London? Or I buy a house in Frankfurt? I'm only here for 7 hours. I would be foolish. I tell some friends that when you go to visit a place, when you stay in a hotel, if you didn't like the TV, what are you going to do? Go buy a 60-inch TV for that hotel room? You're not, because you're only staying there for 2 days, 3 days. It would be very illogical to do that. It would be stupid to do that. Or a rental car, you go and buy brand new tires for that rental car. Why would you do that? You're giving it back. When you realize that everything is going to go back, you're going to go back. You're not staying here forever. Your actions will change. When that mentality changes, the action changes as well.